Hello, and thank you for choosing this clean historical Western romance by Emma Ashwood. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep sharing more wonderful stories for free. So grab a cozy spot, kick back, and let this story whisk you away to a different time and place. Enjoy. Copyright Emma Ashwood. Grace's Heart by Emma Ashwood. Chapter 1. Boston, the 14th of January, 1896. Few people understood why Grace would spend 2 hours on her appearance ahead of a simple trip to the post office. Even fewer would understand that it simply signified who she was. Grace Jones wouldn't call herself vain, but nor was she blind to her beauty. She had been blessed with thick auburn locks that had a natural curl most women spent hours creating. Her eyes were striking and graced with thick, dark lashes. She had her mother's slim build, but her father's height, which resulted in the perfect frame in which to drape with the latest fashions. It also helped that she had perfect posture and, of course, a striking smile that could stop any person on the street. Grace couldn't fathom going out without taking the time to do her beauty justice. Otherwise, it would simply be a disgrace to the beauty God had blessed her with. Unlike her younger sister, Faith, who only cared about playing piano and making music, Grace loved fashion and looking pretty. Unlike her eldest sister, Angel, who had always dreamed of being a teacher, Grace only had one dream. She dreamed of becoming a trophy wife to a rich businessman, someone who could afford her taste in fashion, someone who could provide her with an even more comfortable life than the one her parents had provided. A man with a high ranking in society, a man to whom others would look for advice or mentorship. Grace knew that men like that didn't come around every day, and when she did meet him, she wanted to look her best, even if it was on her way to the post office. Ever since her sister Angel had moved out west to the small town of Waterfall, Grace frequently visited the post office to mail her letters. Of course, she could just leave them in the mailbox for the postman to collect. But that wouldn't give her the advantage of taking a stroll about town. Besides, the post office was right next door to her favorite garment shop. She walked into the post office, her chin slightly lifted as if to infer her social status, her perfectly practiced smile in place. "I'd like for you to mail this, please." The young man behind the desk faltered for a moment when he looked up. His reaction to her beauty flattered Grace, but she would never be interested in a lowly post office desk clerk. "Of course, ma'am. I'll make sure it gets sent on the first train tomorrow," the man stuttered as he accepted the letter from her. "Very well. Now, did any mail happen to arrive for me?" Grace asked, glancing around the post office at the few dock workers, a woman with 2 crying children, and an immigrant that was trying to explain something in a different language. The cacophony of noise irritated her. "Yes, I think we got something in this morning," the man stammered as he reached behind him. "Here you go, ma'am." Grace's smile split her face in two. The smile she kept for special occasions. Although this wasn't a special occasion, she needed to practice it now and then. "Thank you very much, and it's Miss." She turned and walked out of the post office, knowing the desk clerk would remember her long after she'd forgotten she'd stopped by today. She glanced at the letter, and her heart jumped with excitement. It was a letter from Angel. Although it had been a little over 2 years since her sister had left Boston to marry a rancher, Grace still missed her every day. Angel understood her, Angel loved her, and Angel had always been her best friend. She was happy that Angel had found love and now had a little son named Jacob, and even that her sister had discovered her love for gardening. But Grace just wished her sister could have lived closer. A heavy sigh escaped her as she crossed the street. She wouldn't admit it, but she envied Angel's life. Not her life on the ranch or her position as headmistress at the small school in Waterfall, but the love Angel shared with her husband. When Grace and her family had traveled west for the wedding, she only had to look at her sister once to know that Travis Scott was the best husband her sister could have asked for. Lost in thought, Grace bumped into a couple. She laughed softly and turned to apologize when all the blood drained from her face. "Grace, are you all right?" Mitchell asked, holding out a steadying hand. Grace almost jumped away from his hand as if it would burn her. "I'm fine, thank you." "I'm so sorry, miss. I didn't see you there. I do apologize." Grace glanced at the woman at Mitchell's side and felt a wave of nausea rush over her. It wasn't just because the woman was with Mitchell, it was because her belly was swollen with child. "I'll be fine, and it was my fault as well." "Have a lovely day," Grace said quickly, her best society smile in place before she turned and hurried away. Regardless of going in the wrong direction, Grace knew she had to put as much distance between herself and Mitchell as possible. Grace had never made a fool of herself over a man before, but she knew that she had with Mitchell. He was a wealthy aristocrat who had landed in the social circle in Boston at almost the same time Angel had left for the West. Although Grace had known that Mitchell was engaged to an heiress from London, she had done everything within her power to catch his attention. She had attended dances and gone to social events, and every time she'd made sure to spend a little time with Mitchell. Just when she had been certain that Mitchell was ready to break off his engagement and court her instead, he'd announced his wedding date. He had been married for more than 18 months, and now his wife was pregnant. It had taken Grace some time to accept that she and Mitchell simply weren't meant to be, but oh, how wonderful life would have been as Mitchell's wife. She wouldn't have had a single care in the world. Even swollen with child, she would wear the best fashions to make sure everyone knew her husband could afford them. But Mitchell was now a married man, and every time they happened to cross each other, Grace could almost feel his pity when he looked at her, as if he pitied her for not having yet found a husband. A huff of agitation escaped Grace as she stepped right into a puddle of mud. This day was going from good to bad to worse. Perhaps she should just get home and read Angel's letter and forget about the world for a little while, although she sincerely hoped the world wouldn't forget about her. Chapter 2. Faith was playing the piano in the drawing room, the beautiful notes traveling upstairs to Grace's bedroom as she sat down to read Angel's letter. Only Angel knew how disappointed she had been when Mitchell had gone ahead with his wedding. Only Angel knew how Grace still mourned the life she could have had with him. She opened Angel's letter and began to read her sister's loving words. "My dearest sister, it was so nice to receive your letter. I loved hearing about your new dress and the perfectly matching hat. If I only had 1 ounce of your taste in fashion, I would be forever grateful. But then God gave us all different talents. I truly believe that my talent is teaching children. Oh, Grace, I can't even begin to explain how my students delight and entertain me. Every day is a new challenge with new questions and eager minds wanting to learn everything I can teach them. Jacob, of course, has turned into a sponge. At almost 18 months, he's busier than a bee in a bonnet. He's walking as if he's done it since birth, almost running after Travis whenever Travis goes to the horses. Did I tell you about the horses? Oh dear, I don't think I have. Travis has decided to begin breeding his own line of horses. He's brought in another ranch hand to help with the operation, but we're expecting the first of our foals in a few months. Springtime, the time of calves, foals, and flowers. I never thought I'd enjoy living on a ranch or even working in a garden, and yet it feels as if God had led me exactly where He wanted me to be. How about you, Grace? Where is God leading you? In your letters, you speak about fashion and social dances, but you never speak the truth that is in your heart. I know it's been a long time, but are you still feeling rejected by Mitchell? My dear sister, I know how everyone kept complaining about how I should find a husband. I know how horrible it feels when Mother introduces you to every bachelor she comes across, so you can be honest with me. I wish for you the love I have with Travis, Grace. I wish for you a life filled with riches that money can't buy. But most of all, I wish for you happiness. All my love, Angel. Grace let out a heavy sigh as she set Angel's letter aside. She appreciated Angel's words of kindness and her sympathy over Mitchell's rejection, but she didn't like being asked questions she didn't know the answers to. What did she want from her life? Grace knew that she wanted a wealthy husband, all the latest fashions that money could buy, and a beautiful house that bespoke their wealth. But she didn't tell her sister that. Angel would chasten her for her greed for materialistic things. But Angel didn't understand that Grace had no other interests but fashion and courtship. Love? Her brow creased at the thought. Perhaps love was something she wanted, but she wanted security and wealth more than she wanted love. She had never felt any affection for or attraction towards Mitchell, only an inherent attraction to his wealth and place in society. Did that mean she was shallow? Grace, Mother said you must come down for tea. Someone wants to meet you. Faith's voice carried down the hallway. Grace let out a heavy sigh. Whenever her mother had someone wanting to meet her, it was sure to be just another attempt at matchmaking. Grace checked her appearance in the mirror before she headed downstairs to see who her mother's latest match would be. She had barely stepped into the drawing room before she felt her stomach turn and toil at the sight of her mother's guest, the newspaper crier. "Mother?" Grace asked stiffly. "Did we forget to get the newspaper for Father today?" "Grace?" Elizabeth Jones ignored her daughter's sarcastic retort. "I'd like for you to meet Rory McCragan." "A pleasure." Grace curtsied slightly as her mother had taught her. "No, no, miss. The pleasure is all mine," Rory McCragan said, coming to his feet. He turned to her mother. "She's just as pretty as you said, ma'am." "Of course she is," Elizabeth Jones agreed with an easy smile. "Mr. McCragan has recently moved to Boston from Scotland. His family owns quite some land there. He even carries the title of a barrister." Grace kept her smile in place. "Then what, may I ask, is a barrister doing as a newspaper crier on the corner of our street every morning?" Rory shifted a little uncomfortably in his seat. "There were problems with one of the servants in the castle. A misunderstanding, that's all. I'm simply waiting for matters to settle down back home before I return and take my rightful place as barrister." "So you're not a barrister now?" Grace asked carefully. Rory laughed and shook his head. "No, not at the moment. At the moment, I'm a proud newspaper crier." Grace wasn't sure who was more disappointed, she or her mother. Elizabeth Jones had clearly not asked enough questions before inviting the newspaper crier home to tea. Now her nose was turned up slightly, as if a stench had been carried into her drawing room. Grace turned to her mother with a sweet smile. "Mother, you do remember our appointment at the dressmaker in a quarter of an hour?" My, would you look at the time? Thank you so much for coming, Mr. McCragan, but I completely forgot about our appointment." "I could come back tomorrow if that would be more suitable," Rory offered. "That won't be necessary. Thank you." Elizabeth stood up and showed Rory to the door. As soon as she closed the door behind him, she turned to Grace. "I'm so sorry." Grace let out a chuckle. "Mother, your attempts at finding me a husband have become quite pathetic." They shared a laugh, but Grace already knew it would only be a matter of time before her mother tried again. Chapter 3. Boston, the 2nd February 1896. After Angel's latest letter and the disaster with Rory McCragan, Grace realized that if she didn't take her future into her own hands, her mother would. Heaven only knew what type of man her mother would try to match her with next. She remembered Angel had mentioned that she had found Travis's advertisement in the Matrimonial Times. At the time, Grace had thought it desperate for her sister to write to a stranger in search of love. But now, she couldn't help but wonder if Angel hadn't been right in doing just that. There were no wealthy single men in Boston, and those that were available for a reason. Either they had a drinking problem, gambling debt, or such an atrocious reputation for people to avoid associating with them. Instead of going herself, afraid that she would be seen, Grace asked one of the maids to procure a copy of the Matrimonial Times for her. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she hoped that perhaps there would be an advertisement for a wealthy man looking for a trophy wife, preferably in Boston, of course. Grace couldn't imagine leaving the city. She was made for the busy streets and latest fashions from all across the world. She wouldn't settle for anything less. It was late afternoon when the maid slipped the newspaper underneath Grace's door. She snatched it up and began to read, eager to see if she had missed a bachelor in Boston. Perhaps if she found a man of her own choosing, her mother would stop introducing her to bald, boring old men, or young, handsome, and skinflint men. She read through all the advertisements, chuckling at how ridiculous some of them were. A man who could only offer his heart and the shelter of a tent. Another was looking for companionship in a woman who could carry her weight in his lumber yard. Some of the men seemed downright desperate. She was just about to give up when she saw an advertisement from someone in Meadow Views, Indiana. Grace wasn't sure if it was because Angel now lived in Indiana that the advertisement caught her eye, but she found herself reading it twice. Up-and-coming banker seeks the perfect companion to be his future wife. Davis Stone is a self-made man in his own right. As the owner of the bank in Meadow Views, as well as a few properties in this very same town, Davis is now planning on his next achievement of becoming the town's mayor. He is seeking an appealing young lady as his companion in both life and his journey to success. Someone well-spoken who can interact comfortably in society and wouldn't mind hosting events for his business partners and colleagues. As the future Mrs. Davis Stone, the young lady of his choosing would enjoy the luxury of his double-story home in town. Although Mr. Stone dreams of starting a family soon, a nanny would be appointed to help with the care. Mr. Stone also takes pride in having his home tended to by numerous servants. He lives in Meadow Views with his mother and hopes that his future wife could live up to his mother's standards. If you feel that you are suitable and could portray the role of a mayor's wife with stature and respect, then Davis Stone is waiting to hear from you without delay. Grace read the advertisement again and felt a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. Why hadn't she thought of the Matrimonial Times sooner? Davis Stone was exactly the character of man she wanted in a husband. Someone wealthy with a standing in society, someone who was running for mayor. She reached into her drawer for her stationery and began to write to Davis. No one could portray the role of a mayor's wife better than her. As for the children, she didn't mind having a whole brood of them if there were servants and a nanny to care for them, while she cared for herself. After all, a mayor's wife had to look exceptional at all times. Chapter 4. 8th March, 1896. I have an important announcement to make, Grace said, lightly pinging her fork against her crystal glass. She immediately had the attention of both her parents and her younger sister at the table. Dinner time in the Jones house had always been the time for announcements or important conversations, and today, Grace had some very important news to share with her family. We know that Mitchell's wife is expecting, Faith teased her from the side. Mitchell? Mitchell who? Grace fawned with a shrug. Faith's eyes widened with surprise. So tell us this important announcement? Elizabeth coaxed her middle daughter. Then I have to tell you about the luncheon suitor I set up for Friday. A knob stitcher, he makes wigs for the courts. A knob stitcher? John Jones, the patriarch of the family, asked with a frown. Why would you arrange for Grace to have lunch with a knob stitcher? We don't need wigs. Can we please forget about the knob stitcher? I have something to say. Firstly, I'm not going to lunch with the knob stitcher, Grace said firmly as she glanced at her mother. Secondly, I think I might be falling in love. With who? Faith asked, surprised. His name is Davis Stone. He is a banker from Meadow Views, or should I say he owns the bank and quite a few properties in town. He's also running for mayor come fall, Grace said, pleased with herself. Meadow Views? Where is that? I haven't heard of a town by that name, her father asked, confused. Grace nodded. That's because it's in Indiana. No, you're not going to leave us as Angel did to marry a stranger we've never even met? Her mother asked, horrified. Grace shook her head. At this time, we are not yet engaged, but I guess it is only a matter of time. Mother, you want me to find a suitable husband, don't you? I'm not interested in newspaper criers or knob stitchers or any of the other men you have in mind for me. I want to marry someone who understands my needs and respects them. Your need for new clothes, then? Faith asked with a teasing smile. It's expected of a mayor's wife to look presentable at all times. Where is the harm in doing what I do best? Grace asked with a shrug. And this Davis Stone, do you believe he will make you happy? That you can fall in love with him? Her father asked carefully. Grace thought for a moment before she nodded. Father, I do believe that I can be happy with him. He can offer me a very comfortable life, and I believe that once we meet, we might even fall in love. I just feel that I have to follow my heart when it comes to my future. I appreciate all the trouble Mother has undergone to help me find a suitable match, but I'm afraid none of them have appealed to me in the least. Because they were either bald, fat, blotchy, red-faced, ugly-teethed, or had thinning hair, her mother snapped. Grace, you do realize that beauty is only skin deep. One day you're going to wake up and your beauty will have faded. Do you then want a man beside you who would rather find a pretty young wife or a man who loves you for who you really are? Grace didn't like her mother's tone of voice or her harsh words. Mother, that's not what I meant. What your mother means, her father began patiently, is that you can find the right man who says all the right things and does all the right things, simply to win your heart and to have a beauty like you by his side. You should caution your heart against men like that. That's all. Did you send him a picture of yourself? Faith asked, curiously. Grace laughed. Of course I did. I had to make sure he'd write back. Oh, Grace, her mother shook her head. Just promise me you'll be careful. Knowing. I'm glad it worked out for Angel to find someone in the West, but just because it worked out for her doesn't mean it will work out for you too. Can't you just be happy for me? Grace asked, feeling as if her parents and her sister were everything but supportive. Of course we're happy for you, and if you really think that Davis Stone is the right man for you, then we'll support you all the way to the train station when you leave. But you can't blame us for being just a little protective of you. You've always been easily flattered, and flattery isn't something you can rely on for the rest of your life. Well noted, Grace snapped. But if it does work out, Elizabeth's face lit up with a warm smile. You'll be a mayor's wife in a small town. That's about as high as society goes in small towns. Grace felt excitement bubble in her chest. I know, I'll be Mrs. Mayor. Faith shook her head with an indulgent smile. You're right, Grace. You've been preparing for this your whole life. For the next hour, Grace, Faith, and her mother talked about what it would be like to be a mayor's wife. The more she told them about Davis Stone, the more her mother seemed to like him. By the time they were finished and it was time to head to bed, Grace knew that she had found the perfect partner. She planned on writing to him that very night, to tell him how pleased her family was with their correspondence. Perhaps once Davis learned that her family approved, he might consider proposing to her a little sooner. Grace fell asleep with a head full of dreams of life as a mayor's wife. Chapter 5. 10th March 1896. You shouldn't go out today, not in this weather, Faith warned as Grace walked into the living room. I am wearing a coat. Besides, it's not that horrid out. Grace pulled on her gloves, ignoring the howling wind outside the window. It's a storm, Mother said. It's going to be a big one. The wind is coming from the wrong direction, Faith warned again. Why don't you fiddle with your piano keys and I'll send a letter to my future husband? Grace snapped irritably. She loved her baby sister dearly, but just as Angel had always had her nose buried in books, Faith hardly spent any part of her days out from behind the piano. Besides, she didn't want to wait another moment to send her latest letter to Davis. After telling her family about him, she was eager for Davis to know that her parents approved of their correspondence. If she wanted to become the future wealthy Mrs. Mayor of Meadow Views, she had to make sure she kept Davis's interest. For that reason, she had included another photograph of herself which showed her with her hair swept up, wearing one of her best dresses. It was the prettiest photograph she had and had been taken at a society dance a few months before. Well, just be careful, Faith retorted with a pout. As soon as Grace stepped outside, she wondered if her mother hadn't been right. The wind was coming from the wrong direction, and it was blowing with such ferocity that any attempt at keeping her styled hair in place proved useless. Grace kept one hand on her hat to try to keep it in place as she leaned forward and walked head-on into the wind. The post office wasn't far, and she wouldn't be long, she reminded herself. And if the wind really did turn into a snowstorm, which was late for this time of year, she could ride out the worst of it in her favorite dress shop. When she arrived at the post office, she was surprised to find it all but empty. The desk clerk stammered and stuttered his way through his words as he explained that everyone was home, waiting for the storm to ride itself out. Grace threw her head back and laughed. "It's hardly a storm out there." "Might be, come one," the desk clerk said with a cocked brow. With her letter sent, Grace walked out of the post office, surprised to see flurries of snow riding on the sails of the wind. Perhaps it might become a storm, she reasoned as she began her walk home. She heard a horse cry out on the street, refusing to pull a carriage another step, even as the sound of a baby's wails drifted to her on the air. It was a strange day, she reasoned, as she kept struggling to walk against the wind. It was as if even nature feared a little wind and snow. Grace shook her head and turned the corner. The wind rushed at her so fast that it took her breath. If she had been doubting the storm before, there wasn't any doubt left in her mind now. She had been struggling to walk against the wind, but now it was clear that had only been a breeze blowing through the street. Met head-on with the monster, she struggled to put one foot in front of another. The wind snatched her hat away, and Grace turned to run after it. She didn't check the crossroad for carriages or horses, just ran mindlessly after one of her favorite hats. It tumbled on the ground before it was lifted by the wind again, only to be dropped a few yards further on. Grace finally snatched it up and held it to her chest. "Don't you go running off like that," she said to the hat as she brushed the dirt and snow from it. She didn't see it coming, didn't even hear it snapping over the wind's loud howls. She simply felt the impact of something against her head, followed by the blinding pain. Her vision began to blur as she turned to see what had hit her from behind. Healing. A branch had been torn from a tree, now hanging loose and dangling this way and that with the wind's gusts. Grace reached for the back of her head, where she had felt it hit and wet heat covered her hand. She was bleeding, she realized, as if she wasn't there at all. Deep down, she knew she had to do something, run or seek shelter, but she couldn't move. This time, she saw the branch coming. She told her legs to move, but they didn't budge. She watched as the branch picked up speed and swung right at her. At the last minute, she tried to dive towards the road to avoid it, but it was too late. She felt it slice across her face, even as she smelled the scent of fresh blood. Then she felt it rip as the wind tugged it back the other way again. The pain was more excruciating than anything Grace had ever experienced before. "Help," she cried out, but it came out as a soft whimper. Everything around her began to fade, the edges blurring as her vision turned to black. Grace couldn't stop herself from falling. She couldn't seek shelter from the storm, and she couldn't stop the searing pain in her left cheek. Finally, she just gave in to the darkness and the pain until it all disappeared. Chapter 6. 12th March, 1896. "Grace, can you hear me?" The voice sounded far away and then it sounded close. Grace wasn't sure why it sounded so strange. She tried to move, but every single muscle in her body hurt. "Grace, if you can hear me, open your eyes." It was her mother's voice, she realized. She drew in a breath and tried to open her eyes. It was hard at first, but she finally managed. Only when she opened her left eye completely did she feel the tug of pain. "Mother?" Grace asked, realizing she was in the hospital. "Thank heavens, you're awake. We were so worried. You've been sleeping for almost 2 days," Elizabeth explained as she squeezed Grace's hand. "How are you feeling?" Grace frowned. Her throat was dry and she was in pain. "What happened?" "An accident, my dearest daughter. A terrible accident," Elizabeth said. She looked at Grace's face and a few tears slid over her cheeks. "You were out in the storm and a branch struck you down. The people that brought you to hospital, they said it was brutal how that branch struck you before it came back and struck you again." "Hospital?" Grace asked, confused. "A brand." She trailed off, remembering something about a branch and the stinging pain behind her head. She reached for the back of her head and realized her head was in a bandage. She had been so confused about where she was that she hadn't even realized that a bandage covered most of her head and her face and even part of her left eye. "How bad is it?" she asked, turning to her mother. Her mother sniffed and cried. "It's not too bad. You'll be all right." Now that you're awake, you'll be just fine. It's just a cut, that's all." "Did I cut my face?" Grace asked as her hands traveled over the bandage. She felt the pain underneath the bandage on her left cheek. "Did I cut my face?" "Let's not worry about that now, Grace. The most important thing is that you're all right. Heaven knows we thought we were going to lose you." Her mother trailed off tearfully. Grace rolled away from her mother. "I'd like to be on my own for a while." "But Grace, you just woke up," her mother argued. Grace ignored her. Her mother didn't understand what it was like. She felt battered and bruised, and judging by the searing pain in her cheek, her beauty had been tarnished forever. She didn't want to sit and listen to her mother tell her how grateful she should be to be alive. She already knew she would never be the Grace she had been before the storm. Over the next few days, her parents and Faith often visited her. No one spoke of her injuries, only how glad they were that she was healing. Grace still felt a little weak, but the headaches had mostly subsided. The doctor turned up in her room on the 5th day. "Time to change those bandages, my dear." Grace had been both eager and fearful of the moment she would be able to see her injuries for herself. Up until now, she had tried to imagine a small cut on her left cheek. She sat up and waited patiently as the doctor began to remove the bandages. "There, that already looks much better. We've prevented infection for now, and from what I can tell, there won't be any problems with the healing. I think you're ready to go home." The doctor carefully cleaned her wounds, but when he reached for the ointment, Grace shook her head. "I'd like to see," Grace said firmly, glancing around the room for a mirror. "Of course." The doctor nodded. He pulled a small mirror out of his medical bag and handed it to Grace. "See, it's healing beautifully." Grace drew in a steadying breath before she looked at herself in the mirror. A gasp of horror escaped her at the twisted and torn face reflected back at her. She shook her head as tears began to stream over her cheeks. "It's horrible. Why didn't you fix it?" she demanded of the doctor. The doctor frowned. "Now, Grace, if you knew what it looked like when you came in, you would understand how much better it is. It's just a scar. I bet you no one would even notice it." Grace gasped. A blind person would notice it. From her hairline right down to the curve of her jaw, a long, ragged cut had peeled away her skin. The edges, although not infected, were red and seemed angry. Even her eyelid had suffered in the process. The scar looked as if someone had taken a blunt knife and dragged it over Grace's face. For a woman who had prided herself on her beauty her whole life, it was a death sentence. "You should have just let me be," she trailed off, setting the mirror aside. "A scar isn't worth losing your life over," the doctor said firmly. "In time it will heal, and you'll come to accept it. Just remember you're alive. That's enough to be grateful for." "Says the man who's probably been short, fat, and bald his whole life," Grace snapped. The doctor cocked his brow with anger. "I know you're upset, but remember I am here to help you. If you'd rather go home and take care of that wound yourself, allowing it to become infected and eat away at more of your pretty face, there is the door." Grace's eyes widened with surprise. No one had ever spoken to her in that tone of voice. For the first time, she realized how privileged her beauty had made her. It was a hurtful realization, especially now that she no longer had her beauty to fall back on. "I'm sorry. I'm just upset. Thank you for your trouble." The doctor nodded before he began to apply the ointment. Her skin was tender around the cut as he slathered on the ointment. When he was done, he handed her the tub. "Here, apply these 3 to 4 times a day. Try not to cover it up. Fresh air is as important to healing as is a good attitude." Grace smiled sadly. Do you think in time it might go away?" The doctor sighed heavily. "In time its color will lighten, but I'm afraid it won't ever completely go away. I've sent word for your family to collect you today. If there is anything else you need, you'll let me know." Grace nodded before the doctor left her on her own. She couldn't stop the tears that slowly began to seep from her eyes. Her whole life's plan had been centered around her beauty, and now she was scarred, ugly, and broken. No one would ever stop twice to look at her beauty again. Instead, they would stop and cringe at the long scar that mutilated her face. Chapter 7, 15th April 1896. A little more than a month after her accident, Grace stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom and inspected her scar. The doctor was right. The color had begun to lighten. Instead of the angry red line that had run down her face in a jagged line, it was now pink. It was still abhorrible. When she had arrived home from the hospital, her parents and Faith had made sure that all the mirrors in the house had been covered. Grace had appreciated their kindness, because at least for the first few days, she wasn't constantly reminded of how ugly she had become. But little by little, the mirrors had been uncovered, and every time Grace walked past one, she was reminded of the storm and the tree that had stolen her life's dreams and her beauty from her. Some of her friends had come to see her during that first week, offering condolences and help of any kind, but no one had returned to visit a second time. Grace felt betrayed by not only fate, but by her friends. Had her beauty been the only reason they had been friendly with her? Her parents and Faith tried their best not to stare, but Grace accepted it was only natural. A person's eye was drawn towards the unusual, and there was nothing usual about Grace's face anymore. She found herself withdrawing more and more, refusing to even leave the house, because every time she did leave the house, she would be stared at. Children would stop on the street and point at her. Grown men would laugh and tease her. And the women, they were the worst. They would snicker behind their handkerchiefs, probably relieved that Grace was no longer the beautiful woman she had once been. She had written to Angel for the first time since the accident and had yet to receive a response. She knew that Angel wouldn't judge her by her appearance, but the doubt still seeped in as the days went by. It was late on a Friday afternoon when Faith bounced into her room with a bright smile. "It's here, Angel's letter." With relief and excitement, Grace quickly accepted the letter and tore open the envelope. Faith laughed before she left and gave Grace a little privacy. "My dearest Grace, I was so terribly sorry to hear about your accident. Mother and father were devastated at first, thinking you might not survive. Much to my delight, I was grateful to hear of your recovery. I understand that the scar you describe might be unsightly, but Grace, it's just a scar. Beauty never lasts forever. Not even a flower can forever hold its bloom. Do not let this scar keep you from living your life. Don't let it stop you from following your dreams. You have a beautiful heart, Grace, one you've always kept hidden behind your beauty, but now it's time to rely on your heart for the answers. The friends that don't come to visit were never really your friends. The people that stop and stare, it's curiosity, it's natural. Don't scold them for it. Rather, have patience with them and show them kindness. God tests us all in different ways, Grace. Have you considered this to be a test of your character, perhaps? You have always been beautiful and outgoing. Everyone wanted to be close to you, to bask in that beauty you exuded with your charm. Perhaps this is a challenge for you to demonstrate that without beauty, you can still be strong, charming, and kind. I wish I could be there to hold you close, to tell you what a wonderful woman you are and what a wonderful wife you'll make someday. But since I'm not, consider this my empathy. I know you must be devastated, but devastation always leaves room to start over. Start over, Grace, this time on your terms. Love, Angel." Grace read the last part of the letter again and frowned. How was she supposed to start over if she didn't even know what she wanted from her life anymore? She thought of Davis and the letters they had written to each other. She hadn't told him about the accident or her scar, but she knew she didn't have to. Through their correspondence, it was clear that Davis had come to care for her. Surely he wouldn't care about an unsightly scar. Perhaps Angel was right. It was time for Grace to start living her life on her terms. It was time to encourage her relationship with Davis so that she could leave Boston once and for all. She would miss her family dearly, but she wouldn't miss the snickers and gossip of women she used to call her friends. She reached for her stationery and began to pen a letter to Davis. This time, she didn't speak about the life of wealth they planned to share. Instead, she wrote to him about her dreams for the future. Dreams of having a kind husband and well-mannered children. For a moment, she considered telling him about the accident, but quickly decided against it. If Davis was truly the honorable, kind, and loving gentleman he toted to be, a scar wouldn't mean anything to him at all. By the time Grace had finished writing the letter, she had sent up a prayer that when Davis wrote back, it would be to ask for her hand in marriage. She was done sitting around and feeling sorry for herself. It was time she moved on to become the mayor's wife as she had dreamed of being. She caught sight of her scar in the mirror and quickly turned away from it. Before she became the mayor's wife, she would need to find a new way to style her hair in a manner that would hide her scar from the world. Chapter 8, 29th April, 1896. My dearest Grace, I appreciated your last letter more than I can say. Whenever I read your words, I find myself eager for us to start our life together. I've told my mother about you and showed her your picture. She also agrees that we will make the perfect match. In time, we will be the most powerful married couple in Meadow Views. I get excited just thinking about having you by my side at all the community events we will host. I am tired of writing to you and dreaming about our life together, Grace. It's time for us to meet. I know with all my heart that you are the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. I know that you will be a wonderful wife and a supportive partner, and that one day you will be a great role model for any children we might be blessed to call our own. Please do me the honor of accepting my hand in marriage. I promise to care for you, cherish, and protect you for all the days of our lives. With summer on the horizon, the time is right for you to make the journey west. I've enclosed enough money for your journey as well as any essentials you might need. I truly hope that you will accept my offer of marriage and that soon we can be united. Mother will act as a chaperone when you arrive in Meadow Views. We would not want your reputation tarnished before our wedding day. I can arrange for us to be wed within 2 weeks of your arrival. Of course, you can send for a dress from any dressmaker of your choosing for the big day. After all, it will be an event that Meadow Views will remember for years to come. I hope that I will have your parents' blessing for our upcoming nuptials, and please do invite them to the wedding. I will ensure that they have comfortable accommodation during their time in Meadow Views. I hope to hear from you soon, my love. All my love, Davis Stone. Grace raced down the stairs and into the drawing room where her parents were enjoying a glass of scotch. He proposed. What? Elizabeth asked, coming out of her chair. Even Faith abandoned the piano to see what the fuss was about. Davis Stone, he proposed. He sent me money for my train fare and essentials. He even said I could order a dress from a dressmaker of my choosing for the wedding. Grace cried out with excitement. The corner of her eye caught her reflection in the mirror, and she quickly looked away. For a few seconds, she had forgotten about the scar that had ruined her appearance. But Davis wouldn't mind, she assured herself. Let me see that? Her mother asked, reaching for the letter. Grace stood by as her mother read and felt her excitement build when her mother began to smile. It's true, he's proposed. Oh, Grace, how wonderful. Now we lose another daughter to the West. John Jones sighed heavily, although he held up his glass in a toast. You're not losing me, Father. You're simply wedding me off, Grace announced. He's asked you to attend the wedding. He'd make sure of the best accommodations, of course. Will you come? Of course we'll come, Faith answered on behalf of her parents. As soon as you have a date, we'll start making the arrangements, Elizabeth assured her middle daughter. I told you that scar was no more a stain on your future than a bump in your past. Grace's hand touched the scar that had lightened with time, but still caught her eye every time she looked in a mirror. Davis won't care about my scar. He only cares about me. And that's how it should be, her father agreed. Will you be inviting Angel and Travis as well? Faith asked eagerly. Grace nodded. I thought about it. Meadow Views isn't far from Waterfall. I thought I might surprise her with a visit and invite her in person. That sounds like a wonderful plan. Prosody, her mother exclaimed, clapping her hands together. At least you two will be close enough to be able to visit often. You can even raise your children together. Faith snickered. Now I suppose I need to find a cowboy in the West, and then we can all settle down in Indiana. Grace lifted her chin. Finding the right man isn't that easy. I am so happy for you. Can you imagine Mitchell's face when he learns you've become the wife of a mayor? Her sister added with a salacious grin. Jealousy will not begin to describe it. Grace shrugged. She hadn't given Mitchell or his pregnant wife much thought since her accident. Not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't imagine the disgust on Mitchell's face if he had to see her scar. I don't care about Mitchell, Grace said, more for her own reassurance than for her family. This certainly deserves a toast, her father announced. He poured Faith and Grace each a small thimble of wine. To my beautiful daughter Grace, and the beautiful future that awaits her with Davis Stone, future mayor of Meadow Views. Grace laughed at the last part. Clearly, her new position in society appealed to her parents as much as it did to her. She carefully tugged a few strands of hair over her left cheek and lifted her glass in a toast. Although her hair obscured her vision, she knew it helped to hide her scar. If she was going to be in the public eye, then this was going to be a gesture she'd have to start practicing. Chapter 9. Meadow Views, 15th May, 1896. She had watched as the landscape had changed as the train headed westward. Mountains curved into valleys, valleys into plateaus, and plates into wide open spaces of the west. Grace had traveled most of this route before when they attended Angel's wedding in Waterfall, but when the train curved to the right, it took her on a different route, one she had never seen before. Her excitement was only slightly dampened by her fear of what her new husband would look like. She hadn't met him or even seen a photograph of him, but Grace hoped he would be as handsome as he had been charming in his letters. When she boarded the train in Boston, she had made sure to secure a seat by the window, one that would hide her face from the rest of the passengers. The last thing she needed on this journey was to be reminded of how terrifying her scar looked. Now that some time had passed, Grace could admit that it looked as if someone had taken a saw to her face. It was hard to believe that a stray branch during a storm had wreaked such havoc on her perfect features. Grace still flinched when she saw herself in the mirror. She couldn't expect strangers not to react to the gruesome red line that scarred the left side of her face. She had practiced concealing the scar with a few of her thick auburn curls. But as soon as Grace forgot to keep them in place, her scar would be revealed. Gone were the days of ribbons and intricate braids that in the past had flattered her face. Now, she wore her hair down all the time. Quite a few things had changed since her accident, Grace realized as she watched the landscape with its rocky outcrops through the window of the train. She had focused her whole life on being the prettiest girl in the room, only now to realize that without her beauty, she doubted she had anything else to offer. Regardless of those doubts, Grace had also come to realize how shallow some of her friends were. People she had thought were her nearest and dearest had quickly turned their backs on their friendship once they had seen the scar left by the accident. Her family loved her regardless, but Grace didn't just want her family. She wanted friends, and more than anything, she wanted the approval and unconditional love of her future husband. And she knew without a single doubt in her mind that Davis would accept her the way she was. He knew her heart better than anyone. In their letters, they had revealed their dreams to each other, and through those letters, Grace had found herself falling in love with Davis. The train began to slow as it reached the next town. Her heart skipped a beat when she realized this was her stop. Finally, she had arrived at Meadow Views. She took in her new town as the train slowed to a stop at the platform. The town was very much like the small town of Waterfall, near which Angel lived, only bigger. The streets were dusty, and the buildings seemed beaten down by weather and time, but here and there was a fresh coat of paint that held promise for the future. Just like Grace was ready to embrace her new future, she climbed off the train and waited for her luggage. The conductor offered her a toothless smile as he set her luggage at her feet. "Here you go, miss." Grace turned to him with a striking smile. "Thank you so much. Do have a safe journey further." The man's eyes widened with shock and horror as he took a step back. Gone were the fawning, toothless smile and kind eyes. He was horrified. "Yes, miss." With that, he turned and all but ran back to the train. Grace sighed, refusing to let his actions ruin her arrival in her new town. She quickly arranged her hair so that it would cover her scar before she turned to search for Davis. There wasn't a single person or wagon waiting at the platform. For a moment, her heart stopped, fearing that Davis had changed his mind without letting her know. She was a stranger in this town, and if Davis wasn't going to meet her, she didn't want to beg for accommodation for the night. Perhaps she should have done as her parents had suggested and saved some of the money he'd sent her, instead of spending it all on new clothes. Fear had started to crawl up her spine when a young lady rushed towards her from across the street. "Are you Grace? Grace Jones from Boston?" the girl asked breathlessly. Yes, I am," Grace said, lifting her chin just enough to seem important. "I'm Cindy. It doesn't really matter who I am. What matters is why I am here. Mr. Stone sends his gravest apologies for not being here to meet you himself. He is in a meeting with the town council, and as always, Big Bob from the bar has received so many complaints against his establishment that the meetings just spiraled out of control." Cindy laughed. "What I mean to say is, welcome to Meadow Views. I'll take you to Mr. Stone's house, where Mrs. Stone is awaiting your arrival." Charmed by the girl's energetic babbling, Grace laughed. "I understand completely. An important man like Mr. Stone has to attend to business first. Will my luggage be collected later?" Grace asked, glancing at her steam trunk and large carpet bag. "Yes, you can just leave it here. Mr. Stone will send someone for it," Cindy assured her. Grace nodded, enjoying feeling important. Her future husband will arrange it, she thought with a smile as she followed Cindy into the dusty streets of the town. Two men on horses charged by, kicking up dust which made Grace cough. "Sorry, we have rules about that, but the current mayor isn't doing anything about it." "When Davis Stone is mayor, the matter will be attended to," Grace assured Cindy. They walked past a few shops on the main street before Cindy turned to the right into a side street. Right at the bottom of the street stood a beautiful double-story house with a balcony from which you could see the whole town. "Welcome, Miss Jones. That's your new home," Cindy said, pointing towards the house. Grace smiled, feeling as if she had finally arrived in the life she had been made for. Chapter 10. "Ah, you must be Miss Jones. Please do come inside. My son has told me so much about you. I'm Maisie Stone." Maisie welcomed Grace with warmth as soon as she opened the door. Although she was in her late 50s with graying hair, the expensive pearls around her neck, along with the lavish dress she wore, made it clear that she had very good taste. Expensive, that is. Grace smiled warmly at her future mother-in-law. "It's such a pleasure to meet you. Davis has only told me wonderful things about you." "I'm flattered. You must be terribly tired after your journey. Would you like to rest before Davis comes home, or would you mind a cup of tea?" Grace glanced around the beautiful foyer. "I wouldn't mind some tea, to be honest." Maisie nodded in agreement. She all but shut the door in Cindy's face before she picked up a small bell. She rang it twice before a maid came rushing into the foyer. "Mrs. Stone?" "Tea for two, please. Do be careful not to chip my china this time," Maisie said in a biting tone before she turned to Grace. "It does so bother me when they treat fine china as if it were just your regular merchant crockery." Grace smiled as she followed Maisie into a beautiful drawing room. Although her parents had given her a comfortable life, not even her mother owned real china. "You have a beautiful home, Maisie. I know, it's taken me years to achieve this. How can one put it?" Maisie glanced around in thought. "Atmosphere of elegance and poise," Grace suggested. Maisie turned to her with a beaming smile. "That is a perfect description. Oh, Grace, I do think you and I are going to get along just fine." "Here you are, ma'am." The servant girl returned with a tray. Grace smiled gratefully before she helped herself to a cup of tea. She took a seat on the lounger by the window, enjoying the afternoon sun. The tea was perfectly brewed, and the china cold and dainty in her hands as she took a sip. She let out a contented sigh of relief. She had finally reached her destination, and from now on she would live in elegance and poise and drink from real china. A smile lifted the corners of her mouth as she turned to Maisie. Only Maisie was no longer smiling. Her eyes were wide with horror, her cup clattering in her saucer as she struggled to put it down. Grace felt her heart skip a beat, realizing Maisie had noticed her scar. She quickly covered it with a few strands of hair and smiled at Maisie. "Don't worry, it doesn't hurt at all." "Hurt? I'm not worried about that. Davis didn't mention it, that's all." "Were you attacked by wolves?" Maisie asked without pretense. Grace kept her smile in place. "No, unfortunately, a stray branch during a storm, that's all." "Oh goodness, it really does mar your face terribly, doesn't it? I can imagine you were beautiful before that happened," Maisie offered with sympathy. "It's only a part of me. My scar doesn't determine who I am," Grace said a little stiffly. "The piano, do you play?" Maisie shook her head, clearly still intrigued by the scar. She tilted her neck this way and that to get a better look, but Grace made sure that her hair stayed in place by tilting her head at just the right angle. She didn't want to talk about her scar, and she didn't want Maisie pitying her for it. No, I don't play." Davis hoped that one day his wife would know how to play. "Do you?" Maisie asked hopefully. Grace laughed. "Not at all. Although my youngest sister, Faith, has quite the talent." "Right," Maisie said, nodding, but clearly not paying attention at all. Suddenly, Grace couldn't wait for Davis to arrive home. She knew. She knew that he wouldn't mind her scar, and that he would quickly make sure that his mother didn't stare at it the entire time. She tried to make conversation with the older woman, but it was as if nothing interested Maisie now apart from her scar. Rather irritated, and feeling slightly offended by her repulsion to it, Grace decided to focus on her tea instead. The servant girl returned to fetch their cups and noticed the scar. She gasped with wide eyes before she quickly escaped the room. Grace kept her smile in place, wondering why she had thought it would be different in Meadow Views. Just because the scar wouldn't bother Davis didn't mean it wouldn't bother everyone else she met. She had fled from Boston because of the staring and the pointed fingers, and now she was beginning to wonder if she was going to experience all that right here in Meadow Views. Doubt began to circle her fears. This wasn't what she had looked forward to. Her future mother-in-law's unabashed horror, the maid's repulsion, and she hadn't even had a chance to meet Davis yet. Would he be horrified and disgusted too? And even if he wasn't, how could he stop the entire town from staring and pointing at the ugly gash that scarred her face? Chapter 11. Davis Stone sighed as the meeting continued. Usually he enjoyed meetings, especially the meetings where he was asked for his opinion, but today he wanted to get home. He checked the time on his pocket watch and decided it was time for the matter to be dealt with instead of discussed. The town council, consisting of Davis and a few other business owners on the thoroughfare, along with the priest, had met after numerous complaints had been made about the livery. Davis understood the need for a livery, but he had to agree that the complaints were valid. The livery was upwind from town, which meant the entire town suffered the stench during the hot summer days. "I call the meeting to halt with a solution for the problem," Davis said, with the air of authority he was hoping to have once he became mayor. Mountain Falls didn't yet have one, but the upcoming voting would secure them a mayor, and Davis couldn't wait to take on the position. "What do you suggest we do?" the livery owner asked, looking weary. "The livery should close down at its current location. I'm sure everyone here will agree it is in the town's best interest that it moves to the southern end of town. That way the summer winds will take the scent away from town," Davis explained. "I can't afford to rebuild," the livery owner complained. "I'm sure that everyone here won't mind helping." Davis glanced around the table, making it clear he expected everyone to contribute. A few nods circled the table, which brought a large smile to Davis's mouth. It was like leading a flock of sheep, he thought to himself. None of them could make a decision, but were happy to follow anyone that took the lead. That's why he needed to take the lead. "Very well, it's settled then. The town will provide you with land south of town, and the town council will assist with rebuilding," Davis confirmed firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an important matter I need to tend to." Davis gathered his things and all but ran out of the meeting. He couldn't wait to get home and finally meet Grace. Their small town of Mountain Falls wouldn't know what hit them when they laid eyes on Davis's future wife. She was graceful, beautiful, and the perfect trophy wife for a man who intended to become mayor with future sights on the position of governor of Indiana. He made it home in record time, excitement bubbling through his veins at the thought of laying eyes on his beautiful companion from Boston. By now, she should be rested and eager to meet him as well, he thought as he opened the door. He had barely stepped inside when his mother came rushing towards him from the drawing room. "Davis, you should have told me," she hissed under her breath. "It's horrifying," Davis frowned. "Ma, what are you on about? Where is she?" "I sent her upstairs to rest. I couldn't stand looking at it another second. You said she was beautiful, a trophy wife to your position as mayor. This seems more like a rendition of Beauty and the Beast, and you're the beauty." His mother shook her head, clearly disappointed. Confusion made Davis shake his head. "Ma, please calm down. You're sounding delirious. It must be the heat." "Ha! You'll see for yourself over dinner." Maisie Stone snapped before she swirled on her feet and walked away. Davis shook his head, wondering if he couldn't send his mother somewhere for a short period. He loved her more than life itself, but she tended to be exhausting, more so in recent years. The last thing he needed while he fought for the position as mayor was to have his mother lose her sanity. He dragged a hand through his hair and headed to the drawing room, where he poured himself a tot of scotch. A good swallow burned down his throat as he checked his pocket watch again. Dinner would take place in less than an hour, giving him enough time to freshen up before he met Grace Jones in person. Almost an hour to the minute later, Davis stepped into the dining room. Just as he had asked, the finer crockery had been used and the silver had been polished to a fine shine. He assessed the table and smiled at the second place that had been set to his left. Grace's place. His mother joined him with a narrowed look and took a seat. Before Davis could tell his mother not to make it an unpleasant evening, they both turned at the sound of footsteps. Grace stepped into the dining room, and her beauty and lovely dress had Davis catch his breath. She was the perfect trophy wife. Every single man in town would envy him his beautiful companion, he thought with a smile as he stood up. "Grace, it's such an honor to finally meet you," Davis said, reaching for her hand. He brushed a kiss over the back of her hand before he stood back and met her gaze. Her smile was captivating as she shyly glanced away from him. "I'm glad to finally meet you too." She moved around him and took a seat at the table. Davis still wasn't sure what his mother was on about until Grace turned to look at him. "You have a beautiful home." Before Davis could stop himself, he gasped with horror. "What happened to your face?" Grace quickly looked away. "I had an accident a couple of months ago. A branch during a storm. I barely survived." "That's horrible," Davis said, looking at the scar, instead of sympathizing over the accident. "It was," Grace agreed. Davis didn't need another second to understand what his mother had meant. There was no way he could marry Grace. She would become the town despot. Everyone would be snickering up their sleeves about the mayor's horrifying wife. Just like his mother had said, he would be the beauty to her beast. "Shall we eat?" Maisie asked, ringing a bell. Davis nodded, struggling to draw his gaze from Grace's face. The jagged scar looked as if someone had taken a hacksaw to her face. Her one eye drooped as the skin had twisted and twined to recover from the cut. "Dinner is served, Mr. Stone." Davis no longer had an appetite for his food or his future wife. Chapter 12. Grace had been so excited to meet Davis. In her heart, she had truly believed that he loved her. She had truly thought that her scar wouldn't change his feelings for her. But the moment he had set his gaze on her face, she had felt the condemnation, the horror, and the disappointment. It was clear she wasn't the woman he had expected. From his letters, he had sounded so loving and caring that Grace didn't stop to consider for 1 second that he might reconsider his proposal now that she had a jagged scar running down her face. She glanced at him from the corner of her eye and could almost see the ice wall that had flown up between them. Gone were the soft words and dreams of the future. Her heart broke as she pushed the peas around on her plate. She had so looked forward to a nice, cooked meal after traveling for days, but now she wasn't hungry at all. Instead, the judgment at the stone dining table weighed on her like a heavy weight. She had fled from Boston to escape the judgmental looks accompanied by horrification, only to arrive in Mountain Falls and experience the same from her future husband and mother-in-law. She managed to bite her tongue hard enough to keep back the tears, but that didn't mean her heart wasn't breaking. She listened absently as Davis and Maisie discussed the meeting he had attended in town. They spoke of the stench from the livery with the same disdain with which they had treated her scar. If she hadn't been so excited to come to Indiana, she would have packed her bags right there and then to go back to Boston. But she couldn't go back to Boston. How could she return to the place from which she had fled, where all her friends had alienated her? A place where she was consistently reminded of what her life had been like before the accident. Regardless of all that, how could she go back and tell her parents that her future husband found her too ugly to look at? She remembered a time when women and men would stop on the street to look at her, a time when her beauty was admired, her style sought after. Now no one even noticed her style. Instead, they only noticed her scar. On the train, she had thought that if she had a man that loved her enough to accept her for who she is, that in time she could accept that she was no longer the beauty that she had once been. But now she realized that no man would ever love her. They couldn't even look at her. Now and then Davis would look at her and quickly return his gaze to his plate, as if he couldn't stand to look at her. She felt small and worthless and wished she had never come to Indiana at all. Once dinner was over, Maisie asked to have a word with her son. They disappeared into the drawing room for a few moments before Davis returned. "Ma sends her wishes for you to have a good rest. Will we retire to the drawing room?" "That sounds nice. Thank you. Dinner was wonderful," Grace said as she stood up before following Davis into the drawing room. He didn't even acknowledge her compliment. As she walked into the drawing room, she couldn't help but feel anxious. Davis was nothing like the man she had come to know through the letters. Instead, he was cold, distant, and clearly not attracted to her at all. Chapter 13. Grace had been so excited to meet Davis. In her heart, she had truly believed that he loved her. She had truly thought that her scar wouldn't change his feelings for her. But the moment he had set his gaze on her face, she had felt the condemnation, the horror, and the disappointment. It was clear she wasn't the woman he had expected. From his letters, he had sounded so loving and caring that Grace didn't stop to consider for 1 second that he might reconsider his proposal now that she had a jagged scar running down her face. She glanced at him from the corner of her eye and could almost see the ice wall that had flown up between them. Gone were the soft words and dreams of the future. Her heart broke as she pushed the peas around on her plate. She had so looked forward to a nice, cooked meal after traveling for days, but now she wasn't hungry at all. Instead, the judgment at the stone dining table weighed on her like a heavy weight. She had fled from Boston to escape the judgmental looks accompanied by horrification, only to arrive in Mountain Falls and experience the same from her future husband and mother-in-law. She managed to bite her tongue hard enough to keep back the tears, but that didn't mean her heart wasn't breaking. She listened absently as Davis and Maisie discussed the meeting he had attended in town. They spoke of the stench from the livery with the same disdain with which they had treated her scar. If she hadn't been so excited to come to Indiana, she would have packed her bags right there and then to go back to Boston. But she couldn't go back to Boston. How could she return to the place from which she had fled, where all her friends had alienated her? A place where she was consistently reminded of what her life had been like before the accident. Regardless of all that, how could she go back and tell her parents that her future husband found her too ugly to look at? She remembered a time when women and men would stop on the street to look at her, a time when her beauty was admired, her style sought after. Now, no one even noticed her style. Instead, they only noticed her scar. On the train, she had thought that if she had a man that loved her enough to accept her for who she is, that in time she could accept that she was no longer the beauty that she had once been. But now she realized that no man would ever love her. They couldn't even look at her. Now and then Davis would look at her and quickly return his gaze to his plate. as if he couldn't stand to look at her. She felt small and worthless and wished she had never come to Indiana at all. Once dinner was over, Maisie asked to have a word with her son. They disappeared into the drawing room for a few moments before Davis returned. Ma sends her wishes for you to have a good rest. Will we retire to the drawing room? That sounds nice. Thank you. Dinner was wonderful, Grace said as she stood up before following Davis into the drawing room. He didn't even acknowledge her compliment. As she walked into the drawing room, she couldn't help but feel anxious. Davis was nothing like the man she had come to know through the letters. Instead, he was cold, distant, and clearly not attracted to her at all. Chapter 14. The following morning, when Grace woke up, it was with a headache and a pit of anxiety in her stomach. Her nightmares had been so vivid that she had feared she would never escape them. She dreamt of going to a society dance and sitting in a corner while the other girls discussed how horrid she looked, how they laughed into their handkerchiefs as no one asked her to dance. She dreamt of being poor and not having a single penny to rub together, how her clothes were haggard and worn, and how people judged her by them. Nightmare after nightmare, Grace was reminded of the horrible person she had been. In the early hours of dawn, she had woken up and prayed for God to forgive her. She had prayed that somehow, somewhere, someone would accept her. She had prayed for friends that didn't judge her and a future where she was accepted regardless of her scars. Feeling drained and emotional, she dressed in her traveling clothes and began to put her things together. She didn't go down for breakfast with the Stones. She'd had enough of their judgment and awkward conversation the night before. Instead, she snuck into the kitchen and begged the cook for a slice of bread. The old woman was kind and didn't even wince at the sight of her scar. Instead, she offered to pack a small hamper for Grace for her journey. Clearly, word had spread among the help that she was being sent away. Shame made her rush back to her room. She spent her last hour there amongst the beautiful things and furniture, wondering if she would ever have such luxury again. On Angel's farm, there were no luxuries to be had, but she was loved and accepted. Right now, that counted more than any pretty dress or imported bureau. A knock on the door startled her, but it was soon followed by Davis's voice. "The stagecoach has arrived. It will leave when you're ready." Grace didn't hesitate. She grabbed her things, knowing that Davis wanted her to leave just as much as she wanted to go. She plucked open the door, stuck her chin out defiantly, and smiled at him brightly. "Good morning, Davis. I'll just be on my way then." Clearly, Davis wasn't expecting her defiance or the arrogant way she spoke to him. He had probably expected a mess of tears and pleas. Grace refused to give him the pleasure. She knew that once she was in the stagecoach, she would probably fall apart, but she wouldn't do it in front of Davis or his judgmental mother. Best of luck for your journey then," Davis stammered in surprise. Grace nodded. "Best of luck with finding your next trophy wife. I hope she is as unpleasant as she is beautiful. I hope she judges you by the same measure you judge her, and I truly hope that you will find no joy together." Grace knew she was being rude, but she didn't care. Davis Stone had kicked her to the side of the dirt road as if she was no better than a beggar. He deserved her wrath. She climbed into the stagecoach, relieved to be rid of Davis and his mother, and didn't even bother to look back as the stagecoach began to move. As soon as they reached the edge of town, she allowed the tears to fall. She didn't cry for Davis or the life she wouldn't have. Instead, she cried for all the people she had judged in the past. She cried for all the horrible things she had whispered to her friends about other girls. And she cried for not having the courage to go back to Boston to apologize to them in person. Somewhere between Meadow Views and Waterfall, the crying subsided. Grace couldn't help but wonder if Davis's treatment of her hadn't been God's way of punishing her. Perhaps God had known that Grace wouldn't realize the errors of her way unless she experienced the same judgment. Right there and then, she promised to become a better person. She vowed never to judge again, to always be kind, and to accept that true beauty came from within. Even a handsome man like Davis Stone could be ugly when his heart was ugly, a heart that was putrid with hate, vanity, and selfishness. Mountain Falls coming up in the distance, the stagecoach driver called from his seat. Grace turned and looked out the window, grateful to see the familiar town come into view. She had only visited it once with her parents over Angel's wedding, but even once had been enough for it to feel welcoming to her now. For a moment, she regretted that she hadn't had the time to let her sister know she was coming, but she knew Angel wouldn't mind. Angel would be happy to see her, regardless of her new scar or the circumstances. The stagecoach driver stopped in town and came around to the door. "Here you are, miss," Grace smiled. "Might I be so forward as to ask you to continue for another mile out of town? My sister's ranch is there. I just can't imagine walking all that way with all my luggage." The driver offered her a toothless grin. "I'll drive you anywhere you want, miss, but it's extra. Mr. Stone only paid me to bring you here." Grace considered what little money she had left and shook her head. "I'll be fine, thank you." She climbed out of the stagecoach and waited for the driver to set her things down. It would be a long, challenging mile, but she'd make it. She wasn't about to beg a stagecoach driver for a favor, especially not one who would have the pleasure of relaying it to Davis Stone. She watched as the stagecoach drove away and let out a quiet sigh. She was only a mile from her destination, but she had a feeling the worst was yet to come. Glancing at the steam trunk and the carpet bag, she realized it would take her hours, but she was up for the challenge. She began walking, stopping every few yards to rest her arms that ached from dragging her luggage before she set off again. About half a mile down the road, she heard hooves clip-clop behind her. They slowed until the horse finally came to a standstill beside her. "Are you lost, miss?" the man asked from the seat of the wagon. Feeling tired, angry, and heartbroken, Grace wasn't in the mood to be friendly or to hide her scar. She looked up at the man without even attempting to tilt her scar away from him. "No, I'm not lost. I'm exactly where I need to be, or a half mile from it. Thank you." The man held up his hands with a smile. "Then I'm sorry I bothered you. I'm heading in that direction myself if you'd like a ride." Grace wanted to be proud, but she was exhausted. "Are you passing Mountain Falls Ranch?" The man's smile widened, not a hint of a grimace in sight, as he met her gaze. "Just so happens that's where I'm headed. I'm Cooper Taylor, ranch hand at Mountain Falls. You know the Scotts?" Grace nodded. "I'm Angel's sister. Mind helping me with my luggage?" The man jumped off the wagon, and after loading her luggage, he helped her up. "Cooper," he introduced, holding out his hand. Grace shook it lightly. "Grace Jones." He took the reins and called to the horse. Grace glanced at him with curiosity. He was the first person she had met who didn't frown or look horrified at the sight of her scar. He simply didn't react to it all. Perhaps he hadn't seen it, she reasoned as the ranch house came into view. A quiet peace settled over her shoulders, as if everything would be all right now that she had arrived. She let out a quiet sigh and felt a smile curve the corners of her mouth. Angel would know what to do. Angel would take her in, and Angel wouldn't care about her scar, just like the man beside her. The past few days washed over her, bringing back all the emotions that had pummeled her. She tried her best to hold them back, but as Angel came rushing out of the house with a look of happy surprise, the floodgates simply opened. Chapter 15. Mountain Falls Ranch. To 16th May, 1896. Angel had been standing by the window doing the dishes when she'd seen Cooper return from town. At first, she had thought Brandy was with him, but as the wagon drew closer, she couldn't help but recognize the unique shade of her sister's hair. Curious and confused, she had stepped outside, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight of her sister bawling on the wagon. She ran towards the wagon, climbing up on Grace's side and wrapping her arms around her sister before she turned to Cooper. "What did you do?" Cooper held up his hands. "Nothing. Gave her a ride from about a half mile back. She was fine until a minute ago." "Go fetch Travis," Angel demanded as she held her sister. Grace wept loudly, her tears soaking through Angel's dress as she refused to let her sister go. There would be time for questions later, but right now, all her sister needed was to know she was there. She was safe. She was with family. The last Angel had heard, Grace was traveling to Meadow Views to become the wife of the future mayor. She had no idea what had happened, but clearly her sister was devastated. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back and searched her sister's eyes. It was hard not to notice the jagged scar that Grace had written to her about. Although it marred the one side of her face, Grace was still the most beautiful person Angel knew. "What happened, sister? Are you hurt?" Grace shook her head. "I'm not hurt. Thank the Lord. Let's get you inside. I'll make you some tea and you can tell me what happened," Angel said, taking control. Travis had quietly removed Grace's luggage and taken it into the ranch house. Together, Grace and Angel walked up to the house. Angel didn't let go of her sister's shoulders once. She wanted to protect her sister against whatever had made her so emotional, but she knew it was probably already too late. She sat Grace down at the kitchen table while she quickly put on a fresh pot of tea. As soon as the tea was brewed, she joined Grace with a questioning look. "Aren't you supposed to be in Meadow Views?" Travis walked into the kitchen, glancing at his wife for permission to join them before he took a seat. Grace nodded. "Yes, I was." "If you'd rather I leave," Travis offered. Grace shook her head. "No, it's all right. You can stay." Angel smiled at her husband from across the table, knowing that he would offer support in any way he could. She had come to Waterfall to become a teacher, marrying Scott as an instrument to make her dreams a reality. Instead, she had fallen in love with the most wonderful man. She only had to look at her sister to know that Grace hadn't been so lucky. Grace was grateful she was at Angel's home, but she knew they expected an explanation. She looked up and met Travis's gaze, waiting for him to flinch. Instead, he offered her a welcome smile. "It's good to see you, Grace." Travis's smile broadened. He didn't mention her scar, didn't focus on it, and didn't seem repulsed by it. It felt strange to be looked at like a normal person again, Grace thought gratefully. She drew in a deep breath and began to tell them what had transpired over the last 24 hours. When she was finally done, it was Travis who spoke first. "If I wasn't a reasonable man, I would have headed to Meadow Views right now to give that fool some scars of his own." Grace chuckled through her tears. "Thank you, but he simply isn't worth your trouble." Angel nodded. "He isn't, but I agree, that fool doesn't deserve you. What a selfish and rude man." "He wasn't in the letters." Grace trailed off. "Well, you're here now, and that's all that matters." "We're happy to have you," Angel said, reaching for her sister's hand. Grace nodded gratefully. "Angel is right, you can stay as long as you want. We have more than enough room," Travis agreed. Grace couldn't help but feel relieved. She had known her sister wouldn't turn her away, but she hadn't known she would be welcomed with open arms by Travis. "Thank you." Jessica, Travis's mother, joined them in the kitchen. "Grace, isn't it? How nice to see you again." Grace smiled up at Angel's mother-in-law, who had little Jacob on her hip. Her nephew had grown so much, it was clear that ranch life was good for them. "It's nice to see you too, Mrs. Scott, and you, little Jacob." "Please, it's Jessica." Mrs. Scott walked closer and gave Grace a one-armed hug. She smiled up at the older woman and waited for her to flinch, but she just held Jacob out with a smile. "Would you like to play with your nephew?" Grace laughed as she accepted Jacob. A few hours ago, she thought she would never be accepted or loved again. And now here she was in her sister's kitchen, feeling like a normal person again. No one had reacted to her scar, not even little Jacob. For the first time since the accident, Grace felt like she could be herself again. She breathed in the scent of little boy, sunshine, and dust and thanked the Lord quietly that he'd led her here. Chapter 16, 2nd June 1896. "Angel, I'm bored. I can't just sit here all day and watch you and Jessica and Travis and all his ranch hands work while I'm doing nothing. You have to let me help," Grace complained over breakfast. Her sister cocked a brow and shook her head. "You're a guest. Guests don't work. Guests also ask to come and visit. They don't just show up. Guests also usually have an idea for how long they're going to visit." Grace replied with frustration. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like. We enjoy having you here," Travis commented from his side of the table. "I know, but I want to feel I'm at least pulling my weight. Between Angel and your ma, there aren't any house chores they let me help with. Except for watching Jacob now and then, I'm at loose ends." Grace sighed heavily. She turned to her sister with a pleading look. I already told you I can't go back to Boston just yet. Mother and father will pity me, and everyone will stare at me again. I like it here, and I'm grateful I can visit until I know what my next step is, but I won't become a burden. If you don't let me help, I'll simply have to leave and go back to Boston. Angel and Travis shared a look. Without saying a word, it was as if they were having an entire conversation. Grace couldn't help but wish to one day had a relationship like that. Travis shrugged. Angel gave a nod. Travis sighed. Angel smiled, and finally they both turned to Grace. Right, Travis said with a sigh. If you really feel you want to help, we can do with some help with the horses. As you said, Ma and Angel have got the house covered, and the ranch hands are dealing with the herd. But Cooper is a little short on help when it comes to the horses. He's breaking in a few over the coming weeks, so if you could help with feeding, watering, and maybe just leading horses, it would be a great help. Grace had never worked with a horse in her entire life, but surely feeding and watering them couldn't be that hard. She could carry a pail of water, she thought with determination. Great, when can I start? Angel laughed. Is tomorrow too late? Yes, Grace insisted. Can I go take a look after lunch? Then I'll be more prepared in the morning? You're welcome to. But Grace, Travis's voice held a hint of caution. When it comes to the horses, just remember that Cooper is king. No one knows them as he does, so if you don't like being told what to do, then you might not want to do it at all. Grace laughed. I'm not that stubborn. Angel's laughter begged to disagree. All right, I can be stubborn, but I won't be. Cooper is king, and I'm just the hand that helps him. Perfect. Travis rewarded her with a smile. Cooper Taylor had only started on the ranch a couple of months before. Travis Scott had brought him in to help break in new horses and to oversee the breeding. Cooper had worked horses all his life and simply loved it. When Travis approached him, he didn't hesitate to join the Mountain Falls Ranch. As one of the biggest ranches in the area, Cooper had known it would be a step up from the small ranch where he'd been before. Cooper, just the man I'm looking for, Travis called out as he came down from the porch with Grace by his side. Apart from meeting her on the day that she'd arrived, Cooper hadn't spoken a single word to Angel's sister. She was really pretty, and Cooper usually found himself a little mute around pretty women. Not even the scar on her face could detract from her beauty. In fact, he hardly noticed it at all. I've got good news for you, Travis said as he approached him. Grace here has offered to help you with the horses. Anything you need, she's your woman. Not me. Cooper smiled at Grace, excited at the opportunity to spend time with her. That's mighty kind of you, miss. It's Grace, please, she said, flashing him a heart-stopping smile. Cooper swallowed. Grace. Great, Cooper. You show her around this afternoon, and tomorrow she'll start falling in with the work, Travis said before he glanced towards the hills where the sun was shining bright. I've got to check on the cattle, but we'll catch up again later, Travis said to Grace before he turned and walked away. Cooper turned to Grace with a handsome grin. Ready to meet some horses? Her laughter was like a healing balm to his soul. I can't wait. For the rest of the day, Grace followed Cooper around the ranch. She was curious and asked all types of questions, but Cooper didn't mind. His pa had always said an inquisitive soul is a blessing. He had been afraid that she would be scared of the horses, but she surprised him by touching each horse. She rubbed their flanks or told them they were pretty, something he did all the time. The horses basked under her attention, some even nudging her for more attention when they turned to leave. By the end of the afternoon, Cooper found himself realizing two things as Grace headed towards the ranch house. Firstly, she wasn't afraid to work or to get her hands dirty. Regardless of her pretty clothes or striking beauty, Grace was an eager worker. Secondly, he realized that he was going to have a much harder time focusing on his horses, because for some reason he found himself focusing more on Grace than he'd ever focused on anything in his life. Chapter 17, 18th June 1896. Where's Grace? Jessica asked as she joined Angel in the kitchen. Angel was busy cooking dinner, but from the wood stove she had a clear view of Grace out in the yard with the horses. There, she's still helping Cooper. Still, but it's almost 7 o'clock, Jessica said. Angel nodded. She seems to enjoy it. I honestly didn't think she would. Jessica laughed. Family has a way of surprising us. No, it's not that. Angel hesitated for a moment, trying to put her thoughts into words. Although she and Jessica had gotten off to a bad start, they had become friends, more so than just mother and daughter-in-law. When she finally had the right words, she began to explain. From a very young age, Grace was very concerned with her appearance. There's nothing wrong with taking care of one's appearance, Jessica commented. No, there isn't, but Grace, let's just say that she had little interest other than her appearance. Whereas I read and Faith played the piano, Grace would spend all day trying on different dresses, different hats, different hairstyles. For her, her only concern was what other people thought of her. She always wanted to be the prettiest girl in the room, the most fashionable, the most admired. Angel sighed. I'm not saying my sister was vain or shallow. I'm just saying that. She was a little self-absorbed, Jessica offered. Yes, I guess that's the right word. She was quiet, always judging people by their clothes, their hair, their general appearance. Of course, it never really bothered me and Faith because we understood her. But after the accident, Angel sighed heavily and shook her head. Grace's beauty was everything to her. When that tree branch scarred her face, she wrote to me that it ripped away her life, as if her life depended on her beauty. So I can only imagine that when she arrived in Meadow Views only to be turned away by a man who she thought loved her for who she was. She was shattered, Jessica nodded. I can imagine. It must be hard for someone who had been so stylish and admired to suddenly lose all her admirers. Angel smiled sadly. Yes, it was. But now, since she's been here, it's as if she's changed. She's wearing riding pants, a ratty shirt, and a sweat-soaked hat. Angel laughed, shaking her head. The Grace I used to know wouldn't have been caught dead looking like that. Perhaps she needed to learn that appearance is only skin deep. Just look how happy she is on that horse. She's simply glowing, Jessica said with a warm smile. She is, and perhaps you're right. I'm just happy that she's no longer self-conscious. She's truly changed for the better, and she finally seems happy again. She hasn't really been happy since the accident. My parents wrote to me often, telling me how concerned they were that we'd never see the old Grace again. It seems to me we're looking at the new and improved Grace, Jessica said, touching Angel's shoulder. The horse nickered loudly, and Grace began to laugh. I know you only want to turn to the left, Teardrop, but that isn't always possible. She likes you, Cooper said from the side of the ring. Grace nodded. Because I like her. Teardrop had been broken in a little over 2 weeks ago. Now that she allowed riders on her back, Grace had the privilege of teaching her manners. When Cooper had asked her to climb on a horse the very first day of working with him, she thought she'd be 6 feet underground by sunset. But with his patience and skill, she quickly learned how to ride, something Grace never thought she'd enjoy. Riding was for men, not for women of class. And yet, Grace enjoyed working and riding with the horses more than she'd enjoyed anything in her life. It had been a little more than a month since she had arrived at Mountain Falls, and during that time, she had learned so much. She had learned to work with horses, she had learned to cook with Angel and her mother, and she had learned that not everyone judged you by your scars. Here on the ranch, it was as if no one even noticed her scars, as if she could just be herself. Grace allowed her body to move with the horse as they cantered around the ring, and laughter bubbled to her throat. The person she was now was a far cry from the person she had been before her accident. Here, she didn't care about what she wore or how her hair was braided, because the horses depended on her. Horses didn't care if your face was scarred, your riding pants were a little scuffed, or if you hadn't bothered to braid your hair at all. They simply cared that you were there. Grace's eyes skimmed over Cooper as she passed him by. In a way, that applied to Cooper as well. Although they had been working side by side for weeks, he hadn't once stared at her scar or asked her about it. Cooper was unlike any man Grace had ever met. He was always kind, always friendly, and always ready to tease to compliment an achievement. She enjoyed working with him, and she enjoyed learning from him. For the first time in her life, she respected and appreciated someone for who they were and not what they wore. She didn't care in the least if Cooper's flannel shirt was a little faded by the sun or that his hat was stained with sweat. He didn't care about the latest fashions or even have a big house. In fact, he lived with the other ranch hands. And yet, she liked him more for it. Cooper simply was who he was without making any excuses. And to Grace, he was the kindest man she'd ever met. The way he treated the horses, the patience he showed while teaching her, Grace thanked the Lord every night that he had opened her eyes to look past appearance and instead appreciate the person behind it. "Come on, time to head on in for dinner," Cooper called out. Grace pulled on the reins and stopped. She slipped one leg over towards the other one and slid down to the ground, almost losing her footing. Cooper's hands were around her waist in a second. "Are you all right?" Cooper asked, concerned. Grace laughed at her own clumsiness. "I'm fine." She looked up and met Cooper's gaze and felt as if her whole world had just shifted. For a moment, her heart began to race, even as her knees grew weak. Her breath caught as she stepped back. "Thank you." She glanced at Cooper with curiosity. She'd danced with numerous men in her life, but she'd never felt her entire body and soul respond in this way when she stood in a man's arms. Suddenly, Grace wondered what else there was about Cooper she hadn't noticed. Chapter 18. 28th July, 1896. Cooper's only love had been horses for as long as he could remember. There was no animal gentler, kinder, or braver than a horse in his opinion. He loved breeding them, training them, and watching them become trusty steeds. In Cooper's mind, he trusted no human like he trusted his horses. A horse couldn't lie, it couldn't deceive you, and a horse repaid kindness with obedience. It had been his passion and his life's blood until Grace Jones had stepped into the ring with him. From that first day, he had taken her around the ranch. Cooper had felt a curiosity grow inside him about the beautiful woman from Boston. While he taught her to ride, to train, and to care for the horses, that curiosity had turned to intrigue. He never would have imagined the lost socialite he picked up on the side of the road would come to reign over his thoughts for almost every second of every day. After 6 weeks with Grace working by his side, Cooper was tired of denying it. He had fallen head over heels in love with Grace. The only problem was that he would never be good enough for a woman like her. Grace came from a wealthy background. She was used to the finer things in life. She would never open her heart to a ranch hand that lived hand to mouth, one who found more pleasure in a horseback ride than a dance. A man who preferred to work with his hands and be repaid with a horse's loyalty than a man with a bank account fit to court a queen. Until now, he had tried to deny the attraction. He had tried to convince himself that in time the feelings would go away, but he was helpless to the calling of his heart. There was something about Grace he could no longer deny. That something was that she had stolen his heart. When he'd held her briefly in his arms more than a month ago, he'd known he wanted to hold her for the rest of his life. But Grace was more besotted with the horses than she was with the trainer, Cooper realized as she led a foal around the ring. The foal was barely a year old, too young to break in, but Grace had decided there wouldn't be any harm in gaining its trust while it was young. Cooper couldn't argue with her reasoning. The chestnut foal simply adored her. Whenever Grace walked into the corral, the foal would come to her, hoping for a treat from her hand. She was spoiling the foal, Cooper knew it, but he couldn't seem to stop her. "You are simply the most beautiful creature I've ever seen. Do you know that?" Grace asked the foal in a sweet voice. "I could spend the rest of my life just watching you." Cooper's heart swelled in his chest. "I agree." The words slipped from his mouth before he could stop himself. Grace stopped and turned to look at him, laughter waiting in her gaze. But as soon their eyes met, he could see that she saw the attraction in his eyes. Her eyes widened, almost with fear, as she watched him. For a moment the foal disappeared, the sound of cattle lowing in the fields faded, and it was just them. Cooper held her gaze, hoping he could quietly communicate how he felt about her. He was afraid that if he tried to verbalize his feelings, she might never look at him again. After a few moments, her eyes softened and a soft smile curved her mouth. Cooper knew it wasn't a guarantee, but he couldn't help but feel as if something had changed between them. He walked towards her and first brushed a hand over the foal's head. The foal swung his head away, making it clear he preferred Grace's touch. Cooper laughed. I don't blame him, but I must admit I envy him just a little. Grace's eyes widened with surprise. It was the first time Cooper made any attempt to show Grace how he felt. Her laughter was like water to a thirsty soul. You do you? Being led around by a beautiful woman? Cooper teased. Isn't that any man's dream? Grace's eyes narrowed with confusion. Are you saying I'm beautiful? Cooper was surprised that she seemed caught off guard by the compliment. Surely she had looked in the mirror. Surely she knew how strikingly beautiful she was. It was only then that Cooper realized she was thinking of her scar. He stepped a little closer, the foal not liking his proximity. But Grace dropped the lead and allowed the foal to trot to the side of the ring. Cooper brushed a finger over her cheek, the one with the jagged scar, holding her gaze the entire time. You are the most beautiful woman I've ever laid eyes on, the kindest, too. He heard her breath catch and felt his heart skip a beat. She quickly took a step back and smiled at him in an offhand way. I've got to get on with his training. Cooper didn't mind that she was all flushed and flustered. That meant she had felt it as well. The magic that was so strong between them was almost tangible. Chapter 19. Grace tried her best to give Travis and Angel their privacy, retreating to her room after dinner on most nights. But tonight she needed a little time with her sister. She wasn't sure what she was going to ask, but she knew she needed her sister's advice about Cooper Taylor. Instead of retiring to her room, she went to sit on the porch. In the distance, she could see the lights from the ranch hand's bunkhouse. Her mind circled over and over what Cooper had said that day. Did he really mean it? Over the last few weeks, she had come to feel more for Cooper than just respect. She had come to admire him. If she was really being honest, she was attracted to him as well. There was something very charming about the way he talked to the horses, about the way he treated them, and about the way he looked at her. At first, Grace had tried her best to ignore the attraction. After what had happened with Davis Stone, she had vowed never to trust her feelings again. She had believed that Davis loved her with all his heart, and instead he had shattered hers. She couldn't trust the feelings she had for Cooper because if they were wrong, she would suffer a broken heart all over again. Only this time she knew it would be worse. She heard the screen door open and turned to see Angel stepping out on the porch. Mind if I join you? Grace smiled gratefully at her sister. I was hoping you would. Something on your mind? Angel asked, taking a seat. Actually, Grace admitted with a small smile, there's something on my heart. Angel's soft laughter wafted in the evening breeze. Might it be a someone? A certain ranch hand named Cooper, perhaps? Grace turned to her sister with a look of absolute surprise. What? How did you know? Angel smiled as she reached for her sister's hand. Because I have eyes, and because I've known you your whole life. Oh, Angel, I thought I could ignore it, but I can't. I like him very much, and today, he likes me too, Grace admitted. Then that's wonderful news. Cooper is a good man, a hard worker, honest and caring. Travis says he's the only person he would rely on if his life depended on it, and that's saying a lot. Angel encouraged her with a smile. Grace shook her head. That's the problem. He's a wonderful man, but he's a ranch hand and I'm unsightly. It can never work. You stop that right this minute, you hear? Angel snapped with a hint of anger. Grace's eyes widened with surprise at her sister's tone. But it's true. Angel shook her head. No, it isn't true. Firstly, the fact that Cooper is a ranch hand shouldn't even enter the equation. All your life you've been obsessed with how you look and what you have. Where has that gotten you? Grace had hoped for empathy and support. Instead, it felt as if she was experiencing her sister's wrath for the first time in her life. Nowhere. Clothes, houses, things. Money can buy all of that, but money will never make you happy. I know you've changed. You learned a hard lesson in Meadow Falls, so why should that bother you now? Angel demanded. Grace shrugged. It doesn't. That's my point. I don't understand why it doesn't matter. I've always wanted to live in a beautiful home with a room just for all my designer clothing, but when I look at Cooper, I don't want that. That's what is so confusing. It's like he's taken my dreams and tossed them out the window. That terrifies me, Grace admitted. Angel's laughter was soft as she met Grace's gaze with a smile. That's called love. No, but it can't be. Grace trailed off when Angel held up her hand. Angel nodded. It is. And, as for your second argument, Grace, you're right. You were prettier without the scar, but now your heart is prettier. You care more about those around you, even the horses, than for your own appearance. Everything happens for a reason, and perhaps the accident, Davis Stone coming here, perhaps it all was so that you could meet Cooper Taylor. If he likes you and you feel the same way, don't let anything stand between you, not the dreams you used to have or the scar you despise although no one cares. Follow the love in your heart and not your love for materialistic things. Before Grace could agree or argue, Angel stood up and yawned. I'm going to head to bed, but I know you'll do the right thing. She reached for Grace's hand and squeezed it. You smile when he's around. That means so much more than you can imagine. Grace sat on the porch, utterly and completely confused. She'd hoped her sister would convince her that her feelings for Cooper were nothing, that falling in love with a ranch hand could only lead to disaster. Instead, Angel had convinced her of something else. When you followed your heart, nothing mattered but love. Not money, luxury, appearance, or status. Only a resounding feeling of love that seemed to fill your entire body with joy. The question was she brave enough to follow it? Chapter 20. 5th August, 1896. Cooper stood by the water pail, waiting for water to fill the bucket while he watched Grace ride Teardrop around the ring. Just like Grace, the horse had come a long way in the last month. They were both comfortable in a canter, a walk, and a trot. Cooper couldn't decide if he'd ever seen a more beautiful sight than a pretty woman on a strong horse. His heart simply melted at the sight. It had been more than a week since he'd indirectly told Grace how he felt. Ever since then, she'd been a little different. She laughed easier, smiled at him quicker, and wished him a good evening every night when he left for the bunkhouse. He might just be a ranch hand with a few dollars to spare every month, but when Grace smiled at him, it made him feel like the wealthiest man alive. Why do I get a feeling you ain't standing there gawking at the horse? Travis's voice startled Cooper. He turned to his boss and friend and laughed. That obvious, huh? Travis shrugged with a knowing grin. Takes one to see one. See what? Cooper asked, momentarily baffled. Travis slapped him on the back. A man in love. You've got it even worse than I did. These Jones sisters sure have a way of making a man fall to his knees, it seems. Cooper was about to deny it, but finally just sighed with a nod. Even so, Cooper, you have all this to offer a woman. I've got the clothes on my back and a weekly wage. A woman like Grace deserves so much more than I can ever give her. Travis shook his head. A woman deserves a man who can love her, protect her, and cherish her. That's all she needs. The rest of it just falls into place. Travis whistled as he walked away, leaving Cooper to muddle through his words. He knew Travis was right, but he couldn't help but doubt that he would never be good enough for a woman like Grace. He turned and found her saddling a second horse. Confused, he walked towards her with a pail of water. Going somewhere? Cooper asked, confused as joined her. Grace shrugged. I've been riding Teardrop in this ring for more than a month. I think both of us are ready to go for a ride somewhere else. Cooper shook his head. You have no idea what she'll do once she's not in the ring. It's dangerous. You're right, Grace agreed with a charming smile. That's why you're coming with. Cooper was about to argue, but decided against it. He could think of a million things he had to do, and only one thing he wanted to do. He wanted to spend time with Grace. He set down the pail of water and swung into the saddle. Well, are you coming? Her laughter made his heart skip a beat as she leaped into the saddle. Let's go. He started with a walk, making sure Teardrop wasn't going to dart towards the hills as soon as they left the yard. Slowly, he worked his way up to a trot before he set off in a canter. Teardrop and Grace remained by his side the entire time. both horse and woman adept and excited to explore new territory. Deciding to test their skills, Cooper headed towards a gradual incline that would lead them to the top of one of the smaller hills. Just as he had taught her, Grace leaned forward as the horse slowly made its way up the hill. When they reached the top, her laughter was contagious. That was amazing. Cooper climbed off his horse and tied it to a tree before he moved toward Grace. He didn't ask, he simply held out his hands, inviting her into his arms. She hesitated for a moment before her eyes softened and her smile widened. She slid into his arms, resting her hands on his shoulders. "Thank you." Cooper smiled with a nod before he went to tie Teardrop to the tree alongside his horse. He walked over to where Grace was admiring the view, feeling honored to stand by her side. "It seemed like you enjoyed it?" Cooper asked. Grace nodded. "All my life I thought I belonged in a fancy house with fancy clothes, and now, here. I realize that all of that is just things. I can't help but feel that this is where I belong. It probably doesn't make any sense," she chuckled self-consciously. Cooper turned to her and framed her face. "Of course it makes sense because you belong with me." Her eyes narrowed with curiosity. "Do you really feel that way?" Cooper nodded. "Since the first moment I met you." I need time to think about this, Cooper. I like you, but I'm not sure about the future." Grace admitted honestly. Cooper felt a little crushed, but he didn't dare show it. He'd rather she be honest than lead him on and then break his heart. He reached for her hand and smiled into her eyes. "It's a good thing I'm a patient man. I'll wait until you are sure." Not another word was said. Instead, they stood on the hill overlooking the valleys and the ranch house in the distance. Grace might have her doubts, but Cooper knew that in time she would realize that she did belong here. With him. He vowed to pray for just that. Chapter 21. I've got a couple of things to do in town. While I'm gone, you can start working with the foal. Just remember to pay attention to its ears. A horse tells you everything it's going to do before doing it. You just gotta look and listen, Cooper explained as he saddled his own horse. Grace nodded, having heard the mantra numerous times since she had started working with Cooper. After their outride yesterday, she couldn't help but feel a little more excited about the future. Her sister had been right. Standing on top of that hill with Cooper's hand in her hand, she had felt wealthier than she had ever felt before. "Why don't I go with you?" Grace asked, wanting to spend more time with him. Cooper shook his head. "Nah, it ain't a good idea. I'll be quicker if I go on my own. Teardrop and I can keep up. Come on, I haven't been to town since I arrived. Usually it's Angel and Jessica who go. I can help you with whatever you need to do, and we can be back sooner?" Grace asked with a pleading look. "Look, to be honest, I'd rather you stay." Cooper shrugged as he slid the horse's bit into its mouth. Grace was about to try one last time when she realized his reason for not wanting to take her with him. It was as if someone had slapped her without even touching her. Her hand flew to her face to cover her scar. "You're ashamed of being seen with me, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Tears welled in her eyes as she waited for Cooper to answer. Cooper turned to her with a confused look. "What? You'd rather I stay because you don't want people to see you with a monster. You don't want anyone to know that we're close." Her voice cracked, feeling humiliated and heartbroken. Cooper turned to her, facing her full on. "Do you really think that of me?" Grace nodded. "Out here on the ranch where I have family, you don't mind. As long as no one else knows, right? I thought you were different. I thought my scar didn't matter. Clearly I was wrong," she snapped, allowing her temper to overwhelm her tears. Cooper's jaw clenched as he took a step toward her. "Your scar has never bothered me. I hardly even darn well notice it. I haven't asked where you got it, because I don't care. I've never cared," Cooper said in a hard voice. "But you need to keep one thing in mind, Grace. If you don't want people treating you differently over your scar, don't use it as an excuse whenever you don't get your way." Grace took a step back. She'd never seen Cooper look so angry or felt so offended in her entire life. "I don't use it as an excuse." "Then what did you just do? I say I got things to do and you translate that as I'm ashamed to be seen with you. Your scar is your issue, not mine. It doesn't bother me, but clearly it bothers you. Don't make your insecurities my fault." With that, Cooper hopped into the saddle before setting off at a canter. Grace stood there for a moment, unable to move or to speak. Just a short while ago, she had thought she might actually have a future with Cooper, but now she wasn't sure she knew him at all. She didn't bother to fetch Teardrop or to do any of her chores. Instead, she set off for the hill where they had spent time together the day before. By the time she reached the top, she was gasping for air, her lungs burning even as her legs shook from the exertion. Tears streamed down her face as she stood on the hill overlooking the valley. Finally, she looked up at the sky and began to pray. "Dear Lord, please, why do you punish me so? Why do you make me fall in love, only to have my heart ripped from my chest? I didn't ask for this scar, and yet it seems to revolt everyone I care for. Help me, Lord. Please help me to harden my heart against love forever." She cried until she had no more tears to cry. When her tears were dry, she felt empty, broken, and torn, like a vessel that would never carry anything but shame about the way she looked. This time she couldn't run to Angel, and Boston wasn't an option. For some reason, a Bible verse came to mind, one in the book of Peter she had happened upon just after her accident. A frown creased her brow as she remembered the verse. "What matters is not your outer appearance, the styling of your hair, the jewelry you wear, the cut of your clothes, but your inner disposition. Cultivate inner beauty, the gentle, gracious kind that God delights in." That verse had brought her through so many challenges after her accident, but now, not even that Bible verse could console her. It didn't matter how pristine her inner beauty was. On the outside, she feared she would always look like a monster. And even if they loved that monster, no one wanted to be seen with one. Cooper had never cared about Grace's scar. That was why it had angered him so quickly when she had accused him of not wanting to be seen with her. If it was up to him, he would parade her through town with pride and joy. But instead, he'd handled it wrong. He only now realized that although her scar didn't bother him, she was clearly very insecure over it. He should have handled the situation better. He should have assured her that he didn't care about her scar. Instead, he accused her and had lashed out at her in a temper. He leaned forward, keeping his head low against the horse's head as he raced towards town. He was furious with himself for saying the wrong thing, but he couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. The truth about why he was going to town. The truth about why she couldn't go with him. Cooper didn't have a lot to his name, but he did have his mother's wedding ring. A beautiful emerald ring that had traveled with his parents from Ireland when they had immigrated to America as newlyweds. His father had spent his entire life as a horse trainer, working on another man's ranch. His mother fell deathly ill after contracting scarlet fever when Cooper was only 16. They had buried his mother on another man's ranch, and all Cooper had to remember her by was her ring. When he'd lost his father a few years later, Cooper had left the ranch with just the clothes on his back and the only possession he valued, a possession he had refused to sell even when he had no food, nowhere to stay, and nothing to live off of. He wanted to go into town alone to retrieve it from safekeeping. Then he wanted to stop by the merchandise store to buy a new hat, a woman's hat. Because when he proposed to Grace, he wanted to ask her with his mother's ring and a new hat, one that would always shield her from the sun in just the way he wanted to shield her from harm. Some might think him foolish, but until a few minutes ago, it had seemed like a perfectly romantic proposal. After their recent fight, Cooper couldn't help but doubt she'd even say yes. Regardless, he continued to ride into town, praying that God would help her forgive him, and that Grace would finally understand that he loved her, regardless of her scars. Chapter 22. Sleep wouldn't come and ease her broken heart. Grace rolled over in bed, wishing there was a way to forget about Cooper, to forget about her scar, and to simply cease to exist. Because right now, she didn't feel as if there was a reason for her to exist at all. Regardless of what the Bible said, people judged her by her appearance. Even Cooper did. Another tear slipped over her cheek as she hugged her pillow close. She had not told Angel what had happened. She had simply excused herself from dinner and retired to her bedroom. She couldn't stand the thought of telling her sister that another man had rejected her because of the way she looked. In the dark, the moment she lifted her hand and traced her finger over the jagged scar, the sound of music drifted up to her window. Confused, Grace lay back and listened to the fiddle play. She glanced at the pocket watch on her bedside, wondering who would be making music so close to the ranch house at this time of night. When a man's voice joined in, Grace felt her heart skip a beat. She recognized that voice, the cadence of it, and the tone. It was Cooper. Curious, she listened as he sang Home on the Range to the accompaniment of the fiddle. She didn't want to step up to the window, afraid he'd stop or see her scars and turn away. So she sat on her bed and listened as he sang. When her door opened and Angel came in, she smiled at her sister with a loving look. "You're supposed to light a candle." Grace frowned. "Why?" "It's a Mexican tradition. If a man serenades you, it means he loves you. You have to light a candle if you love him back. We've had many seasonal ranch hands come through," Angel explained as she handed Grace a candle and a box of matches. "But today, we fought," Grace explained in the darkness. "And even after you fought, he is still standing at your window at midnight, singing to you." Angel left her with a smile. When Cooper reached the final few notes, Grace prayed she wasn't making another mistake. Before she lit the candle, light permeated the room before she heard the resounding cry of joy coming from outside. "Yee-haw!" Laughter bubbled from her throat as she rushed downstairs and out the front door. Before she could even reach the porch steps, Cooper came around the corner. I'm so sorry we fought. I was wrong, please forgive me." Grace laughed, her heart singing with joy at the sight of him. "You're forgiven." "No, don't forgive me just yet. Let me explain. I didn't want you to come with for a reason, not because of your scar. Your scar doesn't matter to me. You're beautiful, timeless to me," Cooper said, reaching for her hand. "I didn't want you to come because I wanted to surprise you." "Surprise me?" Grace asked, confused. Cooper jogged down the porch and around the corner before he returned with a brand new hat. But instead of handing her the hat, he got down on one knee. "I wanted to go alone because there was something important I needed to fetch. I wanted to retrieve my mother's wedding ring from safekeeping to ask for your hand in marriage." Grace gasped as Cooper showed her the ring in his hand. "Cooper, it was never about your scars. It was about proposing to you the right way." Cooper explained. "Propose?" Grace asked, feeling a little faint with surprise. Cooper nodded with a loving smile. "I planned it going something like this. Grace, you walked into my life like a fresh spring breeze. You stole my heart with your very first smile. I've come to love you with everything that I am and everything that I might ever be. I might never be wealthy, I might never have the social status you have, but I will always love you with all my heart. I ask you to wear this ring as a symbol of my love." Tears welled in Grace's eyes as Cooper continued. "I want you to accept this hat to protect you from the sun, and accept that I will protect you from anything and anyone else. I never knew what my future looked like, Grace. I still don't know. I just know it has to be with you." Grace fell to her knees and curled her arms around Cooper's neck. Yes, I'm so sorry about today. You're right. My scar has never mattered to you. I blamed you for my own insecurities. It will never happen again." Cooper held her tight before he pulled back and met her gaze. "Can I slip my ring on your finger now?" With laughter bubbling from her throat and her heart overflowing with love, Grace accepted Cooper's proposal. She didn't care about possessions, wealth, or even status. All that mattered was that Cooper Taylor loved her. That made her richer than any aspiration she could have ever had before. Epilogue. Mountain Falls Ranch, 10th October 1897. Rose stopped crying and allowed her eyes to finally flutter closed when Grace began to sing A Home on the Range. Where some mothers sang lullabies or others hummed, it was the only song Grace and Cooper used to soothe their newborn daughter when she was upset. She rocked back and forth in the rocking chair, feeling content as the sun sank behind the hills in the distance. The colors of fire opal and amethyst blended in the sky as the sun's last rays kissed daylight goodbye. The sound of hooves thundering towards the house made Grace's smile broaden. Cooper was home. Although they lived a short distance from the main ranch house, it was just far enough for both families to have privacy. Angel and Travis had surprised them with a home of their own as a wedding gift. It was not big, but Grace didn't care. Her two-bedroom house with a large porch and wood stove was all she ever needed in the world. That, and Cooper, of course. She watched as he unsaddled his horse and put him out to pasture before he walked towards the house with what Grace had come to think of as a cowboy gait. In Boston, men walked around like peacocks, flashing their money and their expensive suits. But her husband walked with purpose, not wasting a single ounce of energy by displaying his feathers. Instead, he reminded her of a stealthy mountain lion, ready to pounce at any moment to protect his cub and his wife, of course. "How are my two favorite girls?" Cooper asked as he walked onto the porch. He dropped a kiss on his daughter's forehead before doing the same with his wife. "Just dandy. How was your day?" Grace asked as he sat beside her in the matching rocking chair. "Busy. That foal of yours misses you. He's becoming quite the problem without having you around." Cooper chuckled. "Perhaps you can drive me up in the buggy tomorrow to visit with Angel. Then I'll spoil him a little," Grace suggested. Cooper nodded before he pulled off his hat. Who would have ever thought picking up a stray woman on the side of the road would result in this? Grace laughed and shook her head. Who would have ever thought being chased out of Meadow Views by the future mayor would have me find you? Rose was fast asleep as Cooper reached for Grace's hand. God knew. He planned this all along. Threw us a few curveballs, a few balls of knotted twine, and a branch, Grace added, gesturing to her scar. And a branch. But he knew that when we managed to get through it all, we would be sitting on our own porch watching the sunset with our beautiful baby girl. Cooper sighed contently. Grace explored the silhouette of her husband's face and wondered if a heart could simply explode with love. It was still hard to believe that on the same day she had thought she would never find happiness, Cooper proposed to her at midnight beneath a full moon. She had never given her scar much thought again after that day. Cooper had been right. Just because it bothered her didn't mean it bothered anyone else, especially not anyone that mattered. Their wedding had taken place only a month later, right there in the fields beside Angel's home. Her parents and Faith had come all the way from Boston to attend. At first, her parents had been a little surprised to learn that Grace was marrying a ranch hand, especially given her penchant for the finer things in life. But they had given their blessing only minutes after meeting Cooper. The couple had moved into their new home a month later, grateful and excited about the future that awaited them. Neither had thought their future would soon be blessed with a beautiful baby girl. As much as he was the perfect husband, Cooper was a wonderful father. He was patient and helpful, and eagerly took care of their 2-month-old daughter. Now, when Grace thought of Mitchell and Davis Stone, she knew she hadn't missed out on something. Instead, she had been preparing for something. She had been preparing to find the right man, one who loved her regardless of her scars, to show her what true love really was. Just as Grace had learned that true value wasn't in material items like clothing or possessions or even social status, true value was in faith, family, and love. She smiled lovingly at her husband and knew that she was wealthier than Mitchell and Davis Stone would ever be, because she had a hat to shield her from the sun and a husband who loved her to shield her from anything else. "What are you smiling about?" Cooper asked when a soft chuckle escaped her. Grace shrugged. "My hat." "Your hat?" Cooper asked, confused. Grace nodded. "Rose will need one when she starts riding," Cooper smiled, reading between the lines. "And for everything else, she'll have us."